The city woke up slowly, as it always did. First came the garbage trucks, their hydraulic arms groaning as they lifted dumpsters into their hungry mouths. Then the delivery vans bumping over potholes as they brought fresh bread and milk to corner stores. Finally, the cars, thousands of them carrying people to jobs they mostly hated, to buy things they mostly didn't need. In a penthouse apartment overlooking the park, Richard's alarm had gone off at 5:30 a.m. exactly. He had already run 5 miles on his treadmill, showered, and was now knotting his silk tie while watching financial news on a television screen embedded in his bathroom mirror. His daughter Lily would wake up in another hour. His wife Anna would make her breakfast and their nanny would take her to school. Richard preferred it this way. Less emotional clutter. Down below, on a bench near the subway entrance, Daniel had been awake since 4 a.m. Not by choice, the police had moved him from his usual sleeping spot under the bridge. Something about a city beautification project. He had learned to sleep with one eye open anyway. The streets weren't kind to those who slept too deeply. Daniel had once been like the people rushing past him now. He had owned a small construction company, employed 12 people, paid his taxes on time. Then the recession hit, followed by a divorce, followed by drinking, not necessarily in that order. Now he owned exactly 3 garbage bags of belongings and a reputation for being quiet and non-threatening, which was the best reputation a homeless man could hope for. Richard stepped into his private elevator, pressing the button for the parking garage. The elevator smelled of leather and money. As the doors opened to his level, his phone buzzed. A deal he'd been working on for months was closing today. If it went through, he would clear 8 figures before lunch. He smiled. This was what he worked for. This was why he missed school plays and birthday dinners and anniversaries. Numbers on a screen that grew larger with each passing year. Daniel had started his morning routine too. First he checked his shoes. Still there, still wearable. Then he counted his money, $4.38 in change. Enough for coffee, maybe a donut if the day-old bakery was feeling generous. He rolled up his sleeping mat and tied it to his backpack with frayed rope. The backpack itself had been a gift from a church group last winter. Waterproof with multiple pockets. He loved that backpack more than he had loved some people he'd known. The morning rush was in full swing now. People flowed around Daniel like water around a stone. Some dropped coins into his paper cup without making eye contact. Others pretended he didn't exist. A few, very few, said good morning. Daniel preferred the ones who ignored him. At least they were honest. Richard's car moved through traffic like a shark through water. Other vehicles parted before it. His driver, Thomas, had been with him for 15 years. They rarely spoke unless necessary. Richard preferred it that way. Less emotional clutter, sir, Thomas said, breaking their usual silence. Your wife called. She wanted to remind you about Lily's parent-teacher conference tonight. Richard sighed. I have the dinner meeting with the Japanese investors. I believe she mentioned that's why she was calling, sir. Richard looked out the window. A homeless man was sitting on a bench watching his car go by. For a moment their eyes met. Richard quickly looked away, adjusting his tie. He had once given $100 to a homeless man who approached him at a restaurant. The man had spent it on alcohol and died of exposure 3 weeks later. Richard had decided then that helping was complicated and best left to others. Daniel watched the expensive car disappear around the corner. He had seen the man inside, well-dressed, probably important. Daniel used to be important too. He used to wear suits like that. He used to have a driver. Now his most valuable possession was a prepaid phone he'd found in a trash can, still working with 3 bars of battery left. He used it to check the weather and sometimes, when he had enough change, to call his daughter. She didn't answer anymore. The morning passed slowly for Daniel. He watched people come and go from the subway station. He recognized the regulars, the woman with the purple hair who always dropped a quarter in his cup, the man in the business suit who never looked his way but sometimes left a sandwich on the bench beside him, the teenagers who sometimes mocked him but never actually bothered him. This was his community now. A collection of strangers who weren't quite strangers anymore. Richard's day was a blur of meetings and phone calls. The Japanese deal went through. 8 figures before lunch, as predicted. He should have felt satisfied, but mostly he felt tired. His assistant brought him a salad he didn't want. He ate it anyway because that's what successful people did. They ate salads they didn't want and smiled through meetings they didn't need to attend. At 3 p.m., Richard's phone buzzed again. Anna. He almost let it go to voicemail, but then remembered the parent-teacher conference. Guilt was an expensive emotion, and Richard had been paying for it for years. "Hello," he said, trying to sound warmer than he felt. "Richard, I need you to pick up Lily today. I have the dinner. I know, but my mother fell. I need to go to the hospital. Please, just this once." Richard closed his eyes. He could feel his carefully constructed schedule crumbling around him. "What time?" 3:30. Her school is only 20 minutes from your office." "Fine," he said, already calculating how to rearrange his evening. "I'll get her." Daniel had moved from his bench to a spot near the elementary school. The children would be getting out soon, and sometimes parents gave him money when they saw him watching the kids. He never asked, never approached, just sat and remembered when his own daughter had been that age. She would be 24 now. Probably had children of her own. Probably didn't think about him at all. The school bell rang at 3:15 p.m. Children poured out of the building like candy from a piñata. Daniel watched them, a bittersweet ache in his chest. He saw parents hugging their children, asking about their day, loading them into minivans and SUVs. He remembered those days, the weight of a small hand in his, the smell of bubblegum shampoo, the sound of a little voice saying, "Daddy." Richard arrived at 3:28 p.m., 2 minutes early, which for him was practically on time. He double-parked, ignoring the honking cars behind him. The school looked smaller than he remembered. He hadn't been here since the first day of the year, 4 months ago. Anna had handled all the school-related things since then. He spotted Lily immediately. She was sitting alone on a bench reading a book. His daughter, 7 years old and already more self-sufficient than most adults he knew. She had Anna's eyes, warm and curious, and his focus, which sometimes worried him. Focus could be a lonely gift. "Lily," he called, and she looked up, her face breaking into a smile that made Richard's chest hurt. He didn't see her smile often enough. "Daddy, you came." "Of course," he said, taking her hand. "Let's go." Daniel watched the father and daughter walk away. The man looked familiar, the one from the expensive car this morning. The little girl was beautiful, with bright eyes and a missing front tooth. Daniel felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Regret, nostalgia. It had been so long since he had allowed himself to feel anything beyond hunger and cold. As they walked past his bench, Lily dropped her book. It fell open, pages splayed across the dirty sidewalk. Before Richard could react, Daniel had picked it up, wiping the cover with his sleeve before handing it to the little girl. "Thank you," she said, her smile genuine and unguarded. Richard pulled her away quickly, pressing a bill into Daniel's hand without looking at him. "Here," he said, already moving toward his car. Daniel looked at the money. $20, enough for a hot meal and a night in a shelter if there was space. He watched them drive away, the little girl waving from the back window until they turned the corner. Richard checked his phone while driving. 3 missed calls from his office, 6 emails marked urgent. The Japanese deal had created complications that needed his attention. He would have to cancel dinner with Anna's mother at the hospital. He would make it up to her later. He always made it up later. Daniel stood up, his joints protesting after hours of sitting. The $20 felt heavy in his pocket. He thought about getting a hot meal, maybe even a cheap bottle to warm himself against the coming night. But instead, he walked to the corner store and bought a box of crayons and a coloring book. The little girl with the missing tooth had reminded him of someone he used to be, someone he had almost forgotten existed. As evening fell over the city, Richard sat in his office, surrounded by charts and projections. The numbers swam before his eyes. He thought about Lily's smile, about the way she had held his hand. He thought about the homeless man who had returned her book. He thought about the $20 he had given without really looking at the man's face. For a moment he felt something other than success. For a moment he felt human. Daniel found a spot under an awning where the rain wouldn't reach him. He opened the coloring book and began to draw, his hands remembering skills he hadn't used in years. He drew a little girl with a missing tooth, standing between 2 very different worlds. He didn't know why exactly. He just knew that sometimes the most important connections happen in the spaces between our carefully constructed lives. The city slept, but 2 men, one in a penthouse, one under an awning, were both awake, both thinking about a little girl who had briefly connected their worlds, both wondering if tomorrow would be different, both hoping in their own ways that it might be. The morning air was crisp and unforgiving, carrying the promise of a storm that had been threatening to break for days. Daniel woke to the familiar ache in his bones, a constant companion now that he had spent so many nights sleeping on hard surfaces. He had found a relatively dry spot under the awning of a closed-down bookstore, and for that he was grateful. Gratitude had become a survival mechanism, a way to find small mercies in a world that had shown him little kindness. He unzipped his worn backpack and carefully took out the coloring book and crayons he had bought the day before. The $20 bill from the wealthy father had gone further than he expected. He had eaten a hot meal at a diner, the first one in months that hadn't come from a garbage can or a church soup kitchen. The rest of the money had gone toward this small treasure. Daniel opened the coloring book to the page he had started last night. There was the little girl with the missing tooth, her hand holding that of her father. But something had changed overnight. He had drawn a bridge between them, a structure that connected their two separate worlds. He didn't know what it meant, but it felt important. As the city began to stir, Daniel packed up his belongings and started his daily routine. The school was a good place to be during the day. People were generally kinder there, and sometimes he could hear the children playing during recess, their laughter like music from a world he once inhabited. Richard's morning began much as it always did, with the blare of an alarm and the weight of responsibilities pressing down on him before his feet even touched the floor. The Japanese deal had created complications that required his immediate attention. He would need to fly to Tokyo next week, cutting short his time with his family even further. His wife was already awake, moving quietly around the kitchen. She didn't look at him when he entered, just placed a cup of coffee on the counter where he always sat. "We need to talk about Lily's birthday," she said, her voice flat. "It's next month." Richard sipped his coffee, scrolling through emails on his phone. "I'll handle it. You said that last year, and the year before." "I'll make it up to her," he replied, the words automatic, meaningless. His wife sighed, a sound he had grown accustomed to ignoring. "She wants you to be there this time. Not just your money, but you." "I'll try," he said, already mentally calculating how to rearrange his schedule, how to fit fatherhood between business meetings and international flights. Daniel had found his usual spot across from the elementary school. He watched as parents dropped off their children, some rushing, some lingering for a final hug. He saw the little girl from yesterday arrive, her father walking her to the gate. They seemed distant, connected only by the hand that held hers. As they passed his bench, the little girl, Lily, stopped and looked directly at Daniel. She said something to her father, who glanced over impatiently before pulling her along. Daniel caught her eye and gave a small nod. She smiled back, that same gap-toothed smile that had haunted his dreams last night. The morning passed slowly. Daniel watched the clouds gather, the sky darkening with each passing hour. By noon, the first drops of rain began to fall. People opened umbrellas, hurried their steps. Daniel had no umbrella, just a thin jacket that offered little protection against the elements. He was about to seek better shelter when he saw Lily standing alone across the street, looking confused and frightened. She was supposed to be in school, but there she was, huddled under a small tree as the rain began to fall harder. Daniel hesitated. Interfering could bring trouble. People didn't like homeless men approaching their children. But the look on her face reminded him of his own daughter at that age, lost and scared in a world too big and too cruel for someone so small. He crossed the street slowly, trying to appear non-threatening. "Are you okay?" he asked, keeping his distance. Lily looked up, her eyes wide with recognition. "I forgot my lunch money," she said, her voice small. "I was afraid to go back inside." Daniel looked toward the school entrance. The rain was coming down in earnest now, forming puddles on the sidewalk. "Where's your dad?" "He had to go to work early. My mom was supposed to bring my lunch, but she's not here yet." Daniel thought about the $20 in his pocket. He could take her to get something to eat, but that might cross a line. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out an apple he had saved from yesterday. "It's not much," he said, handing it to her. Lily took it with a small smile. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, the rain creating a curtain around them. "You should probably go back inside," Daniel said gently. "They'll be worried about you." Lily nodded but didn't move. "What's your name?" "Daniel." I'm Lily. I know, he said with a smile. I saw you yesterday. Are you homeless? She asked, her directness catching him off guard. Daniel considered how to answer. The truth was complicated, something a child might not understand. I don't have a house right now, he said finally. Why not? The question hung in the air between them. Daniel thought about his construction company, about the divorce, about the drinking that had cost him everything. How could he explain all that to a 7-year-old? Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, he said. And sometimes those mistakes have big consequences. Lily seemed to consider this. My dad makes mistakes too, she said. He forgets my birthday and he misses my school plays. But he always says he's sorry. Daniel looked at this small child, so wise and so innocent at the same time. Being sorry is a good start, he said. But sometimes it's not enough. The rain was getting heavier now. Lily was shivering, her thin jacket soaked through. Daniel took off his own jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was too big, swallowing her small frame, but it was better than nothing. You should go inside, he said again. Lily nodded, then did something that surprised him. She reached out and took his hand. Come with me. You can wait inside until my mom comes. Daniel froze. The school was a place of authority, of rules and regulations. He didn't belong there. But looking into Lily's earnest face, he found himself unable to refuse. They walked to the school entrance together. A strange pair, the homeless man and the privileged child, connected by a shared moment of kindness. The secretary looked up as they entered, her expression immediately suspicious. Can I help you? She asked, her eyes fixed on Daniel. This is my friend, Lily said before Daniel could speak. He was waiting with me outside. The secretary's expression softened slightly, but only just. Parents need to sign in at the office, she said, her tone making it clear that Daniel was not a parent. I was just leaving, Daniel said, taking a step back. Lily looked disappointed. You could wait in the office, she suggested. Daniel shook his head. I have to go. But take care of yourself, okay? Lily nodded, then did something else that surprised him. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. Thank you for the apple, she said. Daniel watched her walk down the hallway toward her classroom, his jacket still draped over her small shoulders. For a moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope. It was a dangerous feeling, one that could break a man's heart if he let it. As he stepped back outside into the pouring rain, Daniel realized he had left his backpack under the tree. He hurried back to retrieve it, but it was gone. Everything he owned, his sleeping mat, his prepaid phone, the coloring book with the bridge connecting two worlds, all gone. He stood there for a long time, the rain soaking him to the bone, feeling the loss more deeply than he should have. It wasn't just the things themselves, but what they represented, a small step toward reclaiming his humanity, now washed away by the storm. Meanwhile, Richard was in a meeting that had already run 2 hours longer than scheduled. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. Did you drop off Lily's lunch? She forgot it at home, Richard frowned. He hadn't seen Lily this morning. He had assumed his wife had taken care of everything. He typed back a quick reply. I thought you were handling it. The response came immediately. I have to go to my mother's doctor appointment. You need to pick her up after school. Richard sighed, adding another item to his already overflowing to-do list. He would need to reschedule his afternoon meeting, disappoint another client, apologize to another person he had let down. The cycle never ended. Daniel stood in the rain, watching cars drive by, their windshield wipers creating a rhythmic sweep that matched the beating of his heart. He had lost everything, but somehow he didn't feel empty. The memory of Lily's smile, the warmth of her small hand in his, the innocent kiss on his cheek. These things filled a space inside him that had been vacant for years. As the rain began to subside, Daniel started walking, not knowing where he was going, not caring much either. He was just a man in a city of millions, invisible to most, forgotten by many. But for a brief moment today, he had been seen. He had mattered, and in a world that had taken so much from him, that small recognition felt like everything. The afternoon wore on, the storm passing as quickly as it had arrived. Daniel found himself back near the school, drawn there by some force he couldn't explain. He watched as parents began to gather, waiting for the final bell. Among them was Richard, looking uncomfortable and out of place, checking his watch every few seconds, clearly eager to be somewhere else. Daniel watched him, this man who had everything but seemed to have nothing that truly mattered. He thought about the bridge in his coloring book, the connection between their two worlds. Maybe it wasn't so impossible after all. The bell rang and children poured out of the school. Daniel watched as Lily ran to her father, her face lighting up with a smile that seemed to dim the world around her. Richard picked her up, his professional demeanor softening for just a moment as he held his daughter. As they walked past Daniel's bench, Lily looked back and waved. Daniel nodded in return, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Richard glanced over, his eyes narrowing slightly as he recognized the homeless man from yesterday and this morning. He pulled Lily closer, quickening his pace. Daniel watched them go, a bittersweet feeling settling in his chest. He had lost his backpack, his meager possessions, but he had gained something else, a reminder of his own humanity, a connection to a world he thought he had lost forever. As evening fell over the city, Daniel found shelter in a doorway, the day's events replaying in his mind. He thought about Lily, about her innocent questions and her unexpected kindness. He thought about Richard, about the distance between father and daughter that seemed to grow wider with each passing day. The night was cold, but Daniel didn't feel it as much as usual. He was warmed by memories of small kindnesses, by the possibility that even in his current state, he could still make a difference in someone's life. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. The city slept, but Daniel was awake, watching the stars from his doorway, feeling connected to something larger than himself. He was still homeless, still poor, still invisible to most, but he was also a friend to a little girl, a guardian angel for a few precious hours. And in a world that had taken so much from him, that small recognition felt like everything. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm for Daniel. Mornings were spent searching for his lost backpack, a futile hope that gnawed at him. He would retrace his steps to the school, to the tree where he had left it, asking the few people who acknowledged him if they had seen it. The answer was always no. Afternoons were for survival, finding food, a place to rest, avoiding the police who saw him as a problem to be moved along. But through it all, a new purpose anchored him. He found himself drifting back toward the elementary school, not with any intention, but with a quiet pull he couldn't resist. He just wanted to see that little girl, to know she was okay. He would watch from a distance, a ghost at the edge of her world, and that was enough. Richard's world, in stark contrast, was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. The Tokyo deal was consuming him. His days were a blur of conference calls, spreadsheets, and tense negotiations. He worked late, came home to a dark and quiet house, and fell asleep with his laptop still open on his chest. The conversation with his wife about their daughter's birthday had faded into the background noise of his life, another item on a to-do list he never seemed to get to. He saw his daughter in fleeting moments, a quick hug before school, a brief goodnight kiss if he made it home before she fell asleep. He was providing for her, giving her the best of everything. That's what he told himself. That's what mattered. One afternoon, the sky turned a bruised purple. The air grew heavy and still, the kind of oppressive silence that comes before a violent storm. Daniel felt it in his bones. He had found a spot in a bus shelter, a small mercy from the coming downpour. He was watching the school as he often did when he saw Lily walk out alone. This was different. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She had her backpack on and she was walking. Not toward home, but in the opposite direction, toward the busy intersection that marked the edge of the school district. A knot of worry tightened in Daniel's stomach. He watched her small figure move determinedly down the sidewalk. She was too young to be out by herself, especially with the sky about to break open. He hesitated, the same internal battle raging within him. Interfering could get him arrested or worse. But the image of her standing alone in the rain the other day flashed in his mind. He couldn't just watch her walk into danger. He started following her, keeping a safe distance. He stayed on the other side of the street, a shadow in her periphery. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, darkening the pavement. Lily pulled a bright yellow rain hat out of her pocket and put it on, a cheerful dot of color against the grim sky. She walked with purpose, as if she knew exactly where she was going. Daniel's worry grew with every step she took. Meanwhile, Richard was in the middle of the most important video conference of his career. The Japanese investors were on the other side of the world, their faces pixelated on the giant screen in his office. Numbers and projections filled the air. He was in his element, a master of the digital universe he had built. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. He glanced at it, a text from his wife. "Did you pick up Lily?" "School's out." He felt a flash of annoyance. He had completely forgotten. He was supposed to reschedule his afternoon meeting. He quickly typed back, "I thought you were getting her. I'm in the Tokyo meeting." He put the phone face down, forcing his attention back to the glowing screen. His assistant would handle it. She always did. Lily reached the intersection. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming on the awnings of the shops. She stood on the corner, waiting for the light to change. Daniel watched from across the street, his heart pounding. He could see the city bus approaching, its wipers fighting a losing battle against the rain. The light changed and the little walk symbol lit up. Lily took a step off the curb. Just then, a gust of wind, sharp and sudden, tore through the street. It snatched the yellow rain hat right off her head. It tumbled through the air, a spinning saucer of color, and landed right in the middle of the intersection, just beyond the path of a passing car. Without a second thought, Lily did what any 7-year-old would do. She turned and ran into the street to get it. Time seemed to slow down for Daniel. He saw the bus, its huge tires churning through the puddles. He saw the driver, his face a blur behind the rain-streaked windshield. He saw Lily, a tiny figure in a bright pink coat bending down to pick up her hat, completely unaware of the metal behemoth bearing down on her. The driver didn't see her. The rain, the glare, the curve of the road, she was in his blind spot. There was no thought in Daniel's mind. No calculation of risk, no concern for himself. There was only the image of that little girl, the one who had shared her apple with him, the one who had kissed his cheek. He moved. He burst from the shelter of the bus stop, his worn-out shoes slipping on the wet pavement. He didn't run like a man. He ran like an animal, propelled by a pure primal instinct. He ignored the screech of car horns as he darted into traffic. He saw only Lily. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. The bus driver finally saw her. His eyes widened in horror. He slammed on the brakes. The bus shuddered and groaned, the anti-lock brakes pumping furiously. But it was too late. The momentum was too great. The bus was going to hit her. Daniel reached her just as the bus was upon them. He didn't have time to be gentle. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip like iron, and yanked her back with all his strength. They stumbled and fell backward onto the pavement as the bus roared past, its side mirror missing Daniel's head by inches. The wind from its passage felt like a physical blow. They landed in a heap on the sidewalk, Daniel's body cushioning Lily's fall. For a moment, everything was silent, save for the hiss of the bus's air brakes and the drumming of the rain. Daniel's ears were ringing. His elbow was scraped and bleeding where it had hit the concrete. He could feel the small, trembling body of the little girl in his arms. "Are you okay?" he gasped, his voice hoarse. Lily was crying, not from pain, but from shock and fear. She clung to him, her face buried in his dirty jacket. "My hat," she sobbed. Daniel looked up. The yellow hat lay flattened in the middle of the road, run over by the bus. It was just a hat. She was alive. He held her tight, his own body shaking with a cocktail of adrenaline and relief. The bus had stopped 100 yards down the road. The driver was standing by the door, his face pale, staring back at them. A small crowd was beginning to gather. People were pointing, their faces a mixture of shock and curiosity. Someone had their phone out, recording. Daniel knew he had to get out of there. As soon as people realized who he was, a homeless man holding a crying child, the situation would change. Suspicion would replace gratitude. He gently pushed Lily up to a sitting position. "You need to go home," he said, his voice urgent but kind. "Can you find your way?" Lily nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a dawning understanding of what had just happened. "You saved me," she whispered. "Just go," Daniel said, helping her to her feet. He gave her a little push toward the direction she had come from. "Go on now." She hesitated for a second, then turned and started running, her small legs pumping as fast as they could carry her away from the scene. Daniel watched her go, then scrambled to his feet. He could hear the sirens in the distance. He pulled the hood of his sweatshirt up over his head and melted back into the alleyways he knew so well, disappearing just as the first police car rounded the corner. Richard was still in his meeting when his assistant burst into the room, her face ashen. She whispered something in his ear. The color drained from Richard's face. He stood up abruptly, mumbling an apology to the confused faces on the screen, and ran out of the room. There was an incident, his assistant said as they hurried to the elevator. At the intersection by the school. Lily's okay, but... The elevator ride down was the longest of Richard's life. The world of numbers and deals had vanished, replaced by a single terrifying thought. He could have lost her. He burst out of the building into the rain, not even feeling the cold drops on his skin. He saw the police cars, the stopped bus, the small crowd, and then he saw her sitting in the back of a police car, wrapped in a blanket, a paramedic beside her. He ran to her, yanking the car door open. "Lily, oh my God, are you okay?" She looked up at him, her face tear-stained. "Daddy," she cried and threw herself into his arms. He held her tightly, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had never felt a relief so profound, a love so overwhelming. All the meetings, all the money, all the success, it was all meaningless dust compared to the feeling of his daughter in his arms. "What happened?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Between sobs, Lily told him everything. About forgetting her lunch, about walking to the toy store to use her allowance, about the wind taking her hat. And then she told him about the man. "He came out of nowhere," she said, her eyes wide with the memory. "He pulled me. The bus almost hit us." Richard's blood ran cold. "What man, sweetie?" "Who was it?" Lily looked at him, her expression clear and certain. "It was my friend, Daddy, the man from the school, the one who gave me the apple." Richard froze. The homeless man. The one he had shooed away. The one he had given a $20 bill to get rid of. The man he had dismissed as part of the city's ugly scenery. A problem to be ignored. That man had saved his daughter's life. He looked at the intersection, at the flattened yellow hat in the road, at the skid marks on the wet pavement. He thought of the video conference of the deal that had seemed so important just minutes ago. He felt a profound and sickening shame. He had been so focused on building his empire that he had nearly lost the only thing that truly mattered. And the person who had saved her, who had done the one thing he should have been there to do himself, was a man he had barely seen. He held his daughter tighter, the rain soaking them both. He was a rich man, a powerful man, a man who could buy almost anything. But in that moment, standing in the rain at a dirty city intersection, he had never felt so poor. The police station was a world of beige walls and fluorescent lights, a place that smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. Richard sat on a hard plastic chair, his expensive suit damp and wrinkled, feeling completely out of place. His daughter was wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, sipping a hot chocolate from a styrofoam cup, her small hands still trembling slightly. An officer had taken their statement, his questions gentle but routine, like he had heard this story 100 times before. But Richard knew this wasn't a routine story. This was his story, and it had been forever changed by a man who didn't even have a name in his world. His wife arrived, her face a mask of panic and relief. She hugged their daughter so tightly the little girl complained, then turned to Richard, her eyes filled with questions he couldn't answer. He just shook his head, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. He had been in a meeting discussing millions of dollars while his daughter had been facing down a city bus. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. Later that night, after their daughter was finally asleep in her own bed, surrounded by her toys in the safety of her home, Richard stood by the window looking out at the city lights. The lights stretched for miles, a galaxy of human activity, and somewhere out there was a man with no home, no money, no status, but who possessed something Richard was beginning to realize he had lost entirely. A sense of humanity, of connection to the world around him. He saved her, his wife said, coming up behind him. She wasn't asking, she was stating a fact that was still too big to fully comprehend. "I know," Richard said, his voice quiet. "I was on the phone with Tokyo when you texted me. I forgot." She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her silence was more powerful than any accusation. They had been drifting apart for years, their lives running on parallel tracks that rarely intersected. He had always told himself he was doing it for them, for their family. But now, looking back, he saw only a series of missed birthdays, rescheduled dinners, and empty promises. The next morning, Richard woke up with a singular purpose. He didn't go to his office. He didn't check his emails. He went to the police station. The officer from the night before recognized him. "Mr. Harrington, is your daughter okay?" "She's fine." "Shaken, but fine. I'm here about the man." "The one who helped her?" The officer nodded, understanding. "We're looking for him. A good Samaritan. We have a few witnesses who described him, but no name. He disappeared pretty quickly after the incident." "I need to find him," Richard said. The words felt inadequate. He didn't just need to find him. He needed to see him, to talk to him, to understand. "We're doing our best," the officer said. "These cases can be tough. People like him, they don't want to be found." Richard left the station feeling frustrated. He was used to getting what he wanted, to making things happen with a phone call or a signed check. But this was different. This wasn't a business deal. He couldn't buy his way out of the guilt or into the man's gratitude. He spent the day driving around the neighborhood near the school, a place he had only ever seen through the tinted windows of his car. He walked the streets looking for a face he barely remembered. He saw people who lived lives so different from his own, people who struggled with things he couldn't imagine. He saw a woman counting change to buy a loaf of bread, an old man sitting on a bench with everything he owned in a shopping cart, a group of teenagers sharing a single pizza. For the first time, he wasn't just seeing them as background noise. He was seeing them as people. He went to the school hoping to find some clue. He talked to the secretary, who remembered Lily coming in with a homeless man, but she didn't know his name. She looked at him with a mixture of pity and suspicion, as if trying to figure out why a wealthy man was so interested in someone society had discarded. Daniel was miles away, on the other side of the city. The adrenaline from the day before had worn off, leaving him exhausted and jumpy. He had seen the police cars, heard the sirens. He knew he couldn't go back to his usual spots, not for a while. He found a spot under a highway overpass, a noisy, grimy place where he could disappear into the shadows. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. The little girl in the pink coat, the roar of the bus engine, the screech of the tires. He had acted on instinct without thinking. But now, in the quiet of the overpass, the reality of what he had done settled in. He had saved a life. A child's life. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For years he had felt invisible, worthless. He had been a burden, a problem, something for people to step over. But for one brief, terrifying moment, he had been a hero. He wondered about the little girl. Was she okay? He hoped so. He thought about her father, the man in the expensive suit who had looked right through him. Would he even care? Or would he just be grateful the problem was taken care of? Glad he didn't have to get his hands dirty. The next day, Richard tried a different approach. He went to the shelters and soup kitchens, places he had only ever read about in the newspaper. He talked to the people who ran them, describing the man who had saved his daughter. They were kind, but they had seen so many faces, heard so many stories. They couldn't help him. One woman, a nun with a kind face and tired eyes, listened patiently to his story. "We get a lot of Daniels," she said gently. "Men who have lost everything but their dignity. They don't want to be found, especially not by someone like you." "What does that mean?" Richard asked, feeling defensive. "It means they're proud," she said. "They've lost their homes, their families, their jobs, but they still have their pride. Your money, your gratitude, it can feel like pity. And pity is a heavy burden for someone who is already carrying so much." Her words stuck with him. He had been thinking about this as a transaction, as a debt to be paid. He would find the man, give him money, maybe a job, and the books would be balanced. But he was starting to see that it wasn't that simple. He wasn't just offering help. He was asking for something too. He was asking for forgiveness, for a way to absolve his own guilt. That evening, he went home. His daughter was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing with crayons. She looked up when he came in, her face serious. "Did you find him, Daddy?" she asked. Richard shook his head, sitting down next to her. "Not yet, sweetie. But I'm still looking." "He was nice," she said, going back to her drawing. "He didn't talk much, but he had kinol. D-eyes." Richard looked at his daughter, at her innocence and her wisdom. She saw the man, not the homeless person. She saw the kindness, not the dirt and the rags. He realized he had been looking for the wrong thing. He was looking for a homeless man, a stereotype, a problem to be solved. But he should have been looking for a person with kind eyes. The next morning, Richard went back to the school. He didn't talk to the staff or the parents. He just watched. He watched the children arrive, laughing and shouting. He watched the parents, some rushing, some lingering. He saw the small interactions, the moments of connection he had been missing for so long. He saw a father kneel down to tie his daughter's shoe, a mother wipe a smudge of dirt from her son's face. These were the moments that made up a life, the moments he had been trading for stock options and overseas deals. He was about to leave when he saw it. Tucked behind a bush near the street where he had parked his car was a small tattered coloring book. It was soaked from the rain, the pages warped and stuck together. He picked it up, carefully prying the pages apart. And there on the first page was a drawing of a little girl with a missing tooth, holding hands with her father, and between them, a bridge. Richard felt a jolt like an electric current running through him. He remembered. The man had been carrying a backpack. He must have dropped it when he ran into the street. This was his backpack, or what was left of it. He looked through the rest of the book, page after page of drawings. Some were of the city, of buildings and streets. Others were of people, faces he didn't recognize. But many of them were of a little girl with a missing tooth, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying, sometimes just watching the world go by. He realized then that the man hadn't just stumbled upon his daughter. He had been watching her, caring about her from a distance. He wasn't a random stranger. He was a guardian angel, a silent protector. And Richard had been so wrapped up in his own world that he hadn't even noticed. He clutched the coloring book in his hand, a tangible link to the man who had saved his daughter's life. He didn't have a name or an address, but he had something more important. He had a glimpse into the man's soul. He had seen his kindness, his loneliness, his quiet dignity. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't just looking for a man to reward. He was looking for a friend, a teacher, a guide back to a life he had forgotten how to live. He went back to his car, the coloring book on the passenger seat beside him. He didn't know where the man was, but he knew he wouldn't stop looking. He would search every street, every shelter, every dark corner of the city until he found him. He had to. It wasn't just about repaying a debt anymore. It was about saving himself. The days turned into a week. Richard had become a ghost in his own life. He canceled his trip to Tokyo, a decision that sent shockwaves through his company and cost him millions. He stopped answering his phone for most of the day, delegating responsibilities he had once micromanaged with obsessive pride. His world, once a carefully constructed fortress of appointments and objectives, had been reduced to a single all-consuming search. Every morning, he would drive to the neighborhood near the school. He would walk for hours, his expensive shoes scuffed and dirty from the city sidewalks. He carried the tattered coloring book with him everywhere, a constant reminder of the man he was looking for. He showed it to people, to shopkeepers and hot dog vendors, to anyone who would stop and listen. Most just shook their heads, their eyes glazing over. They had their own problems, their own lives to live. A rich man's quest was just another curiosity in a city full of strange sights. He was starting to lose hope. The city was vast, and a man who didn't want to be found could easily disappear into its cracks. He felt a frustration he hadn't felt in years, a helplessness that was completely foreign to him. He was used to being in control, to making things happen, but this was beyond his control. This was a matter of chance, of luck, of a moment of grace in a world that often seemed to have none. One afternoon he was sitting on a bench in a small park, the coloring book open on his lap. He was exhausted, physically and emotionally. He looked at the drawing of the bridge, the connection between the two worlds. He felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just guilt or shame anymore. It was a longing, a deep and profound longing for a connection he had lost, a life he had forgotten how to live. He was about to give up for the day when a young woman sat down on the other end of the bench. She had a kind face and she was holding a camera. She looked at him, then at the coloring book in his lap. "Are you an artist?" she asked, her voice gentle. Richard shook his head. "No, I'm looking for the man who drew this." He told her the story, the whole story from the beginning. He didn't hold anything back. He talked about his daughter, about the accident, about his own failures. He felt a sense of relief as he spoke, as if he was finally unburdening himself of a weight he had been carrying for too long. The woman listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, she was quiet for a long time. I think I might know who you're talking about, she said finally. I'm a photographer. I've been working on a project about the homeless people in the city. There's a man I've seen a few times near the library. He's always drawing. He keeps to himself, but he has a gentle way about him. He looks a little like the man in your story. Richard's heart leaped into his throat. The library? Where is it? The woman gave him directions. I hope you find him, she said as he stood up to leave. He seems like a good person. Richard thanked her, his voice thick with emotion. He walked to his car, his steps quick and purposeful. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a renewed sense of hope. He was close. He could feel it. The library was a grand old building, a testament to a time when knowledge was valued more than commerce. Richard hadn't been in a library in years. He had forgotten the smell of old books and the quiet hum of a place dedicated to learning and contemplation. He found the man sitting on a bench in a small reading garden behind the library. He was hunched over a notebook, a pencil in his hand, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was thinner than Richard remembered, his face more lined, his hair grayer. But it was him. There was no mistaking the quiet dignity, the gentle focus. Richard stood there for a moment, his heart pounding. He didn't know what to say. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head. But now that it was here, all the words seemed to have deserted him. He took a step forward, and the man looked up. His eyes were wary like a wild animal that had been cornered. He started to gather his things, preparing to flee. Wait, Richard said, his voice barely a whisper. Please. The man stopped, his hand hovering over his notebook. He looked at Richard, his eyes searching his face, trying to place him. I'm Lily's father, Richard said, the words feeling strange and inadequate. The man's expression softened, just a little. He remembered. He remembered the little girl with the missing tooth, the bright yellow rain hat, the roar of the bus engine. Is she okay? He asked, his voice raspy from disuse. She's fine, Richard said. She's more than fine. She's alive because of you. He walked closer, holding out the coloring book. I found this, he said. I think you dropped it. The man looked at the coloring book, then back at Richard. He didn't take it. He just shook his head. I don't want your money, he said, his voice firm. I don't want anything from you. I know, Richard said, his voice cracking. I'm not here to pay you back. I'm here to thank you, and to apologize. He sat down on the bench, leaving a space between them. I was wrong about you, he said. I was wrong about a lot of things. I was so busy building my life that I forgot how to live it. I forgot what was important. You reminded me. The man was quiet, his gaze fixed on the fountain in the center of the garden. He wasn't used to this, to being seen, to being heard. He had spent so long being invisible that he had forgotten how to be visible. I don't know what to say, he finally said. You don't have to say anything, Richard replied. You've already said enough. They sat in silence for a long time, the sound of the fountain a soothing backdrop to their thoughts. Richard felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He had found him. He had finally found him. I want to help you, Richard said, his voice gentle. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I respect you. Because you're a good man. You deserve a second chance. The man looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and hope. He had heard that before, the promise of a second chance. It usually came with strings attached, with expectations he couldn't meet. What kind of help? He asked, his voice cautious. A real kind, Richard said. No strings attached. A place to live. A job if you want one. Medical care if you need it. Whatever you need to get back on your feet. No questions asked. The man was quiet for a long time, considering Richard's offer. He looked at his worn-out shoes, at his dirty hands, at the life he had been living for so long. He thought about the cold nights, the constant hunger, the fear of being seen, of being judged. He thought about the little girl, about the feeling of her small hand in his. Okay, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. I'll try. Richard smiled, a genuine heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. He stood up and held out his hand. My name is Richard, he said. The man looked at his hand, then at his face. He saw not a rich man, not a powerful man, but a fellow human being, a man who had lost his way and was trying to find it back. He took Richard's hand, his own hand rough and calloused. My name is Daniel, he said. The months that followed were a time of healing and transformation for both men. Daniel moved into a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a place of his own, with a bed and a shower and a kitchen where he could cook his own meals. Richard helped him get the medical care he needed for his injured back, and he found him a job working in the maintenance department of his company, a job that allowed him to use his skills as a former construction worker. Daniel was a good worker, quiet and reliable. He didn't talk much to his coworkers, but they respected him. They could see the change in him, the way he carried himself with a new sense of purpose and pride. He was no longer a ghost, a shadow on the fringes of society. He was a man with a name, a home, a life. Richard, in turn, was changing too. He started leaving work early, picking up his daughter from school, attending her school plays and parent-teacher conferences. He reconnected with his wife, rediscovering the love they had once shared, a love that had been buried under years of neglect and resentment. He started to see the world not as a marketplace to be conquered, but as a community to be a part of. One sunny afternoon, Richard and his family were having a barbecue in their backyard. Daniel was there too, standing by the grill, flipping burgers with a newfound confidence. He was wearing a clean shirt and a pair of new jeans, a gift from Richard's wife. He looked like a different man, but his eyes were the same, kind and gentle. Lily ran up to him, her face flushed with excitement. "Daniel, look what I can do," she said, doing a cartwheel on the grass. Daniel watched her, a smile spreading across his face. He had never had children of his own, but he felt a love for this little girl that was as deep and as real as any father's love. She was the reason he was here, the reason he had been given a second chance. "That was amazing," he said, giving her a high five. Richard watched them, his heart filled with a warmth he had never known before. He saw the bridge in the coloring book, not as a drawing, but as a reality. A bridge between two worlds, between two men who had nothing in common but everything that mattered. A bridge built not of steel and concrete, but of kindness, of courage, of a shared moment of grace. He walked over to Daniel, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet. Daniel looked at him, his eyes clear and steady. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "We're even now." Richard shook his head. "No," he said. "We'll never be even. But we can be friends." Daniel smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up his whole face. "I'd like that," he said. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the backyard. The smell of grilled hamburgers filled the air, and the sound of children's laughter echoed in the distance. It was a simple moment, a perfect moment, a moment that none of them would ever forget. It was a moment that had been born out of a tragedy, a moment that had changed their lives forever. It was a moment that proved that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, that sometimes the richest people are the ones who have the least, and that a single act of kindness can bridge the widest of divides.